This is the Editor's Half Hour. Step into the life of an editor for 30 minutes as we discuss the craft of editing, industry trends, and editorial resources. Your host is co-founder and CEO of Peak Publishing Inc., Nadia Jaja Pupa. She is experienced in all facets of the publishing industry, from editing to design, and works with corporate clients and self-published authors. Nadia and her guests are about to share powerful insights and stories on what it takes to be an editor. And this is your host, Nadia Jaja Pupa.
Welcome, listeners, to the Editor's Half Hour. You are in for a treat. I say it before every episode because you are in for a treat. I am so excited to cover the topic of technical editing. This is a certain kind of editing that I just feel that it doesn't get talked about enough. It's not, in my opinion, a glamorous or always visible side, but I do believe that it is absolutely critical, and I think that it is high time that we cover this topic in this episode. So I guess I'll leave the description or explanation of what technical editing is to our fabulous guest, Jess Stampy. Jess, welcome to the podcast. I am so happy to have you. Please introduce yourself.
Happy to be here.
Please introduce yourself to the listeners and tell them what you do.
My name is Jess Stampy. I have been an editor since I graduated high school. I kind of fell into it because I did well on papers, and when your classmates find out that you do well on papers, they ask for a lot of help. So
Yep.
my launch into editing was in academic editing for sure. And then after a number of years of freelancing, I kind of wanted a little bit more stability in my life, my income, things like that. And so I took a turn and I decided to go into technical editing, which can be conflated with a couple of other titles like technical writing, technical editing,
Right.
content manager, things like that. And so I was very lucky that I got an entry-level job as a technical editor. And then I had an opportunity to become a lead technical editor within 2 months. So
Wow.
I went full tilt into editing and writing very quickly. And so it's been a journey for sure, learning so much about how technical editing compares to different types of editing that I've done, what's the same, different skills you need to really excel in that role. So I'm kind of excited to talk about them.
Yes. Okay, so let's just jump right in then. Why don't we how would you, if you met somebody outside of the editing community, somebody completely ignorant of different types of editing, even different levels of editing, how would you describe what you do and how it differs from a typical editor who maybe edits books?
I would say that when you're editing a book, most of the time, the book is likely written for the intended audience, meaning it's at the technical level of their audience. But when you get some technical writing, it can be very different. So you're working with someone who's incredibly knowledgeable in their field, and they might not always recognize that the people that they're talking to through their writing aren't as well-versed as they are. And so I would say a lot of technical writing is translating, not necessarily like, Spanish to English or things like that, but looking at something and saying, how can we make this work for the intended audience? Like, is this a user guide? Because that needs to be, very simple. Or is this a technical guide? This needs to stay very technical. And so their job is to get the information that you need on paper. And my job is to make sure that the information that they put on the paper makes sense for the intended audience. And I would say that's the big difference between technical editing and other types of editing I've done. When you're working with academic editing, there can be a little bit of translation in there, but it's usually academics writing for academics, right? Or a technical person writing for technical people. But with technical writing, that divide between what some people know and what some people don't can be very wide. And so as a technical writer, editor, you have to be aware of what level it's at, what level it needs to be at, and not lose anything in that translation. And I would say that's probably the hardest part of technical editing in a nutshell.
Oh, that sounds it sounds intimidating. I'm not going to lie. I feel like it is a very intimidating area, and there's a lot of considerations there. So are you editing material that is like in the tech space? Are you editing things that are, describing how to function, how a product functions, like in a user guide or instructions for use type of thing? Because I think like it kind of goes to what you were saying about the intended audience. And then my second question is, I always do this to my guests. I bundle in like 5 questions into one. So there's that aspect, but then also you mentioned translation, but it did actually light a bulb in my brain of do you have to take that into consideration of what language, what English words you're using that may be translated into 5 other languages if it's a user guide?
I haven't dealt with anything that I know is going to be translated into another language, thankfully.
Okay.
But I do know there are ramifications to that, especially as I was working with government documents at times, because you do have to account for things like plain language standards.
Right.
And so once you account for those, it does make translating, I'm guessing, easier. But since I'm not on that side, I'm not going to, tell someone their job's easier because I put it in plain language. So, but I do know that part of your role is to make sure that you're making it as easy as possible for those people. So that's what I would say is when it comes to translating, you're going to try to get that document to the cleanest, easiest version it can be. And so hopefully that does make that translation aspect easier. And now I'm trying to remember what your first question was.
Oh, it was basically about, what types of things are you looking at on a regular basis? Is it like user guides or is it tech stuff like coding and computer stuff?
Yes. You name it, I've seen it.
Okay.
So a lot of technical editing and writing, it just really depends on the field you're getting into, right? So a lot of the work that I did was in monthly reports and technical documents and just a smattering of user guides, right? But if you're working for a company whose client list is more of like an end user, as we would call them, someone who, is going to open up a box with a computer in it, that kind of editing is going to be very different, right? You're going to be focusing a lot on, I would say, yes, plain language, even though that's not government mandated, right? But also simple language versus, let's say you work for the CDC. You would be working on reports going out to people who know nothing about a disease, right? And then you have to send it out to the healthcare professionals. And then you have to send it out for government press releases. So it just really depends on the role that you're taking and honestly, what kind of field you end up in. And it even varies from company to company. So I would say if you're looking at a technical editing or writing job, I would ask, what kind of documentation are you working on regularly? For me, it was a lot of reports, right? But for someone else, it could be very technical document heavy. And if you don't have a technical document background, that might be a harder field to break into than, say, one that focuses a lot more on monthly reporting and end user kind of documentation.
I see. So there's a lot of considerations that come into play with this type of editing. It's not just a handoff of here it is. When you're given projects that are outside of what you regularly work on, are you given like a project brief or additional background information about it so that you're aware? How does that work?
I would say most often no.
Okay.
But you do usually have access to subject matter experts. You'll hear me call them SMEs occasionally because that's what they go by, SMEs.
Yeah.
So
SMEs.
SMEs are your best friends. If you're going to be a technical editor, I would say a good chunk of being a good technical editor is being able to maintain those relationships, because these are people who are incredibly busy, who are working at an incredibly high level, and they've already done what's probably their least favorite part of the job, and that's writing. As someone who is married to a techie, he would rather do anything than write a document.
Right.
He said he would kill to have a technical writer on his team. And I'm like, please don't murder anyone on that behalf. But I understand his frustration, because if my job was coding and suddenly I had to write something, I'd be super frustrated, because that's not what I went to school for, what I wanted to do. That's like if my job was writing and suddenly they asked me to code a program, I'd say, that's going to be really difficult because that's outside of my skill set.
Yeah.
And so part of my job is working with these writers and saying, I'm not judging you for whatever you put down on the paper at all. Because if I tried to do your job for a day, I would last far less time than you would last doing mine. Right? Like I read a document one time where I'm like, I don't even know what these buttons are. Right? So I wouldn't be able to help you. And it's part of that's knowing and acknowledging that we're all human and we all have our different strengths. And so working with SMEs, that's typically how you get the background. I'm not saying that you won't ever. Occasionally there'll be calls that you can get put in on, but unless you've really ingrained yourself with your team, they're not thinking, oh, we need to invite the tech writer to this call. They're thinking, oh, we need to invite the stakeholders to this call, which is fine.
Nice.
But unless you're like, hey, remember me? Can I come too? They won't always remember that you might want to be there as well.
I see. And you've been in some of those meetings, I'm assuming. What are those like? What are those? Are you a fly on the wall or are you speaking
most of
up?
Most of the time, yes, a fly on the wall because you don't really, you might have some understanding of what they're talking about, but it's certainly not the level that they're operating on. And so you're just trying to sit there and learn the background for whatever's going to end up in that document, right? So by the time you get a document, it might be stripped of a lot of the nuance that you'll hear in meetings like that of why things were done this way or what does this do? And so those are really nice. For example, if you're working through a document that has a workflow, for example, and you might not see that workflow, but if you're on that call, you can see, okay, oh, this is how it's laid out. This is what that user is going to see. And that will give you that context you need to be a better editor of that document because you'll have more of that background information about why these decisions were made or what decisions were even made on that call.
Yeah. So you're advocating for your job in some ways by having to speak up, right? I mean, maybe not on a daily basis, but I think you have to have a little bit of that assertiveness about what you do, why you're there, why you have the job you have, you know?
Yeah.
So what is that? I mean, there's really no question about that, but more just, are there moments where you're feeling a little bit like, hey, I'm over here, remember me? Like,
there are those moments. I feel like there are those moments in every role, to be honest. When you're working with people, it can be very editors of any caliber, I feel fall into this. I will say the biggest culture shock I experienced in getting in this role has been going from someone who was hired to do something, meaning you have that high visibility, right? To being hired on a company to do something in which the employees don't want to work with you, likely. I'm not saying they don't enjoy the work of your labor, but not a lot of people enjoy getting edited. I will say that. And you try to, as editors, we try to make that process as painless as possible. Right. But there's a certain heart on the sleeve aspect, even if you've been doing it for a number of years. And I say this as someone who has, had to learn to just put that kind of stuff aside, right? But I have to do that all the time. And so working with some of these people, you have to recognize that they've brought their own baggage. And so you have to be like, hey, I know you don't really want to work with me. Maybe you've worked with a frustrating editor in the past, or you're like, this is fine as is. It doesn't need to go through an editor who's going to go through and maybe change the meaning of stuff. And I get that. As someone who also does writing, you get when someone looks at your work, they might change something and you're like, that changes what I was trying to say. But part of that process is acknowledging that might happen and learning from that and making that relationship to where, you might change something, but you'll check in and say, hey, is this okay? And then sometimes they'll say yes. And sometimes they'll say, no, that's not what I was trying to say. And I was like, okay, well, let's talk about it. Right. And I find that those conversations are where the best clarity emerges because you get it in their words and you're like, oh, okay. So I get what you were trying to put on the paper. And now let's make that happen.
I love this. I love it. So you're really bringing in a lot of the skill sets that editors have in terms of, obviously, we all respect the writer, making sure, but also functioning in some ways like a coach where you are encouraging that SME, subject matter expert, and relying on them too to help you do your job. So it's a collaboration. Does it feel like a collaboration too for you?
It has to be. It has to be. The moment you start thinking of it like you're in a void is the moment you've lost touch with your audience and your stakeholders there. If you don't look at a document and think, how can I work with this person to make it better? It's not going to get better. You can't, especially since you are not the expert in that topic, you cannot take over that document. It has to be collaborative, or whatever you end up with is going to be in a vacuum and it's not going to be useful to anyone.
Yeah.
So I would say you have to look at that kind of editing, or any kind of editing, honestly, as collaborative, because that's the whole process, right? If I could write it, I would write it, but I would still need an editor.
Right? So, okay, I got to tell you this, and I probably shouldn't even share this. Well, you'll tell me later if we should even remove this from the podcast, because this is getting into the territory of like stereotyping types of editors. So this is what happened. Let me tell you, let me set the stage. When I was in my 20s, okay, I was working full time. Same as you, Jess. I have been an editor since basically I was born, right? I have not had a job as anything other than being an editor. So that's all I know. Now, I have known about medical editors. Obviously, I had Barbara Gastel on the podcast, super intimidated by medical editors. I thought, oh, maybe I want to get into this, you know? So during my 20s, I was working full time as an editor in my 20s and learning things that I didn't even realize I was doing, like functioning like a developmental editor and didn't know it was called developmental editing. You know what I mean? Revising textbooks, working with SMEs. It was a lot, right? And I wasn't getting paid very well. And I thought, well, I want to get paid well. So what pays better than, so that's why I was intrigued by medical editing. But then here's the thing. My uncle came up to me and he worked, this was several years ago. Like I said, I was in my 20s. He was working for a major cybersecurity company. And they had a technical editor who was in charge. The way that he described her, and so this is where I'm getting into that stereotype of, so this is what I thought for years after what I thought technical editors were like. He described her as super like confident. And she wore a leather jacket to work. And everybody was like, all of the techie guys were like intimidated by her because she's beautiful and she had like long hair and wore this leather jacket, drove a motorcycle to work. She did not take crap from anybody. I was like, I was cracking up and I'm like, okay, that's a total stereotype though, right? And he said, that's how all the technical editors are. That's what he said. He goes, you got to be one of these editors. You got to look into it. And I did. But I never came to fruition. My career never went down that path. But for years, I was like, oh man, these technical editors are like these badass leather jacket wearing motorcycle riding editors.
You know what's funny about that is I have a motorcycle.
I knew it. I knew it.
And I got it after I became a technical editor.
So there's something to the stereotype.
There might be, now that I think about it. But I will say, out of all the technical editors I know, I might be the only one who has a motorcycle.
Well, I don't know now. I don't know, Jess. I don't know.
Oh my God.
Think about it. This is somebody who was like I said, I'm crying, by the way.
I do not own a leather jacket, though. I will say that. I feel like I need to up my game here a bit.
You need to up your game. Get that leather jacket because you do exude confidence. You walk around. I mean, you show up to Aces, like, what's up? Everybody's like, oh, you don't know Jess. You got to go meet her. She's one of the cool kids. But that's how I've always felt about technical editors. I actually have tears in my eyes from laughing. But these technical editors are something else. Like there's medical editors. And I'm equally intimidated by their knowledge and their expertise and all of the school. I mean, the certificate programs. There's a lot there, but the technical editor side is you may or may not have taken a certificate or a program to get into it. Some have the experience that can just get them in, but there's a little bit of that that badass vibe. Like, oh, they are the confident, because you're wearing a lot of hats as a tech, like you just explained.
You
as
are
a technical editor.
definitely.
Yeah.
I
So-
would say, oh my goodness. That is
Yeah.
the funniest. And of course, it got really dark in here just now because a cloud went over my window.
Oh, I was going to ask about that. That's okay.
Oh,
Well,
no, it's fine.
that's just for the so that's just for the YouTube listeners, by the way. This is a video podcast as well, but for audio listeners, it won't even affect it. So
Cool.
anyway.
So I would say I can't wait to tell people at work that you have this opinion of technical editors, because it is the funniest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. Ever. Because most of the tech editors I know are very soft-spoken people.
Okay.
So I'm just dying thinking of them being like these baddie, leather-wearing
baddies.
motorcycle riders. And I'm like, well, I can't say anything because I have a motorcycle.
You have a motorcycle.
But
I thought I saw that on Facebook. I'm pretty, because we've been following each other on socials, and I thought you had one. I'm like, oh, maybe she is.
I
Like,
do.
she is that.
I don't have a leather jacket yet, but I will have to put that on my agenda.
Get it. You got it.
Yes, I'm gonna have to get it. So I love leather gloves, but not a jacket. So I would say there's two kinds of technical editors, and they can vary in those groups widely. One way of getting to become a technical editor is you start editing and you get into technical editing. The other way is you start as a technical person and you end up doing technical editing and writing. And so I would say the personality type that comes from that, it's probably pretty dependent on which realm you came from.
Okay.
So the more soft-spoken people I know tend to have come from the tech realm into writing. But I've seen both sides with the same
Right.
kind of, it's
Right.
a huge variance. I will
Right.
say that they have different needs or different priorities when editing. So I am an editor who's gotten into technical editing, as we know. I can find so many fun little things when I'm editing. And I'm not saying that technical people can't, but when I'm going in with a background of proofreading and things like that.
Right.
When my coworker who has a tech background reads through a document I've read through, she asks the most amazing questions that honestly, people might not notice that the grammar was off, but they're going to notice if that information was missing. So they're way more
Wow.
important than me. But people who have that tech background, they get into tech writing, are gold. They're gold
Yeah.
because they understand both sides of it, right?
Yeah.
They might be a little bit less precise in using some of like getting really into like Chicago Manual style, which is one of,
Yeah,
things like that,
that's-
or AP,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, but they have a much deeper understanding than I, as someone who doesn't have that tech background, will have. And they do a fantastic job of editing. But I would say that they're more confident in their edits than I am. And so in that regard, I'd say they're more confident because they know
Yeah.
they'll be like, this environment doesn't support that. And I'll
Wow.
sit there being like, you go, because I had no idea, right? I don't know what kind of environments support what. Now, as you go through the process, you learn a good amount. Don't get me wrong.
Of
But
course.
I don't have the same years of experience as some of these other people who just know, right? And I think that's amazing. So, as part of technical editing, like, I'm getting a degree in in information technology. So I can have a little bit more of that background when I'm reading these things. But I wouldn't say you need to get into the field, but I would say if you want to become a really good technical writer, taking some courses, doing some independent learning will really help you up your game and understanding more robustly what you're reading. So you can start asking those probing questions of like, are you sure this is right? Because you don't want to
Right.
call out a subject matter expert on their own, on their
Yeah.
own file unless you're really
I know.
sure. And so
Right. Right.
because
Right.
they can make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, right? But
Exactly.
so you definitely want to query it and are you sure about this? And then
I
they
love
can
it.
say, oh yeah, no. Like yesterday I read the word Audi in a file and I can tell you that we
Oh.
don't support Audi. I'm pretty sure it was
Oh.
audit. But I queried that because I don't think
Okay.
they meant to say that they were working on Audis.
Oh, that's so funny. See, this is the beauty of what you do. And it's so intricate and it's so specialized. And so tell me a little bit more. So you're working on right now on getting a degree?
Yeah,
Is that what
I'm
you
in
were
my
saying?
master's program right now. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I didn't even realize
Because I
that.
wasn't busy enough already.
Yeah, I was gonna say you're just bored at home, I guess. You got nothing else better to do. No, but for real,
Yeah.
that's really that's really, really cool. And do you think that will, like you said, it'll give you that stronger edge on understanding what you're working on and giving you more of that expertise on the subject matter, getting
Yeah,
that technical
because
side.
it gives you a completely different framework at looking at what you're reading in general.
So okay, several more questions, follow-up questions about working on a master's right now. As a mom, I know that you have kids. So that's a lot. So I want to know about that work-life balance, and now you're adding another component on school. We'll get there. We're going to go there. And we're going to go more into I'm very much intrigued by the subject matter expert communication. So I want to ask some more on that. But unfortunately, we do have to wrap this up. And fortunately, but unfortunately, but fortunately, these questions will be answered in our exclusive interview that will follow up from this interview. And those are available for Patreon supporters for $5 a month. If you join my Patreon, you'll get access to this exclusive interview and past episodes. But before we do end this, Jess, why don't you share some words of wisdom and encouragement for editors like the Nadia in her 20s who was just glamorizing this world of technical editing and like, oh man, I'm going to just be so successful and I'm going to be a badass. But really though, I want to know what you can share on ways that editors who are highly skilled, whether they've been editing for 20 years or whether they're in their 20s. Like I said, the 20-year-old Nadia who's like, can I do this? Like, what do I need to do? How do I get into this? Because I didn't have that guidance back then. I didn't know what to do. And so I just, I got whatever job I could during the Great Recession. And it led into, like I said, developmental editing, but not technical editing. So what do you think? What do you think you can share on resources, ways, paths to get into it?
I would say if you want to get into technical editing, you're going to want to likely have a background in either copy editing or developmental editing. Proofreading is important, don't get me wrong, but
Right.
you have to have and like getting into the meat of a document. That's very necessary with technical writing and editing. And I say that as someone who didn't have a heavy copy editing background. Mine's in developmental and proofreading. I found proofreading to be the least helpful. It's helpful in every aspect of life, but then in terms of transitioning to technical editing, you want to have that sort of drive to go deeper into a document, to really make it shine. I would say if you're more techie, go for tech roles that are more internal, I would say, kind of internal kind of communications where you're working on software design documents and things like that stay inside and are for technical audiences. But if that kind of thing intimidates you, focus on working on contracts that might have more of a user guide bend or a report bend. And those are the ones that are really great for aspiring and, people just trying to dip their feet into technical writing and things like that. I would say your best bet on standing out if you're currently not doing technical writing and editing is to be able to show that you can learn technical things, whether that's taking a course through like Codecademy or doing a crash course in Python or something like that, learning about the software development lifecycle, learning what common programs companies use like Atlassian suite of products. Doing those things will show that you can learn new things, which is an incredibly important skill in technical writing and editing, but also that you're willing to learn and that you're willing to put in that work to show, hey, I might have just done editing in the past, but I can learn your systems and help you with this. And so learn the lingo a bit, things like SMEs, SDS, which is the software design specification, things like that. Learn a little bit of the lingo of what people are using, learn what things like agile are, waterfall. And that way, when you go into an interview, you're not going to go in as, well, I've been editing, which is what I did.
Right.
And I lucked out. But I would say the more you have, more that background info you have on the framework for the way they talk and think, like, oh, you have to submit a ticket for that, things like that. If you know that in the interview, it's going to show, okay, the ramp up for this person's going to be a little easier than I thought. And so it'll give you that edge in comparison to someone who's coming in without any sort of technical background.
Right. And like you said, companies are willing to hire, folks who don't necessarily have a certificate in technical editing or an expertise in the tech space. But if, like you said, you show the willingness to learn and that you're at least on, you got a little bit of an edge because you know the terminology. I think that's really is something that will set someone apart in an interview for sure.
Yeah.
So the final question, what are your thoughts on the industry as a whole? I mean, where do you think, what is the outlook for technical editors? I'm assuming that there is going to continue to be a stronger need for technical editors in various industries. I mean, on levels of like hardware, software, engineers that who are putting together materials that editors are like, okay, I see what you're doing, but we need to make this make sense. I mean, I feel like there's going to continue to be a need for it. What are your thoughts? I mean, we can get into AI. We can get into AI, but we can save that too for their exclusive interview.
AI is an important thing to talk about, but I don't think it's going to end up playing a large role. And I know that, all these tech companies are going to AI, but at the end of the day, does the end product affect your customer relationship with your brand? And the answer is always going to be yes. And so when you think, okay, what are the ramifications if this fiction book is edited by AI? There are a lot of ramifications, but no one's going to die at the end of the day because a book was edited by AI. I get that. I'm not saying I like it, but I understand that. However, when you're talking about technical writing and editing, a lot of things could go wrong, especially if you're talking about like medical editing. And if you're talking about technical editing, if someone interfaces with something poorly, that could cause huge problems with the software. And so I think AI has a lot going on right now. And I'm not going to get into the ethical debate of it. But I think that if companies choose to go full AI on their documentation without a technical editor to look at it, they're going to revert back more quickly than they would probably like to admit, just because it needs a human touch. It really does. AI just doesn't understand the nuance to a certain extent. Now, I'm not saying it'll never get there, but I'll say that right now, there's no way that you could trust it to put out a document without flaws. Now, humans make flaws too, but we're at least aware of really egregious ones, you know?
Right.
And there will need to be a human in there to ensure that whatever document we're putting out, that it meets the quality standards of whatever company you're working with. So that's going to be a customer relationship strengthener, is making sure you have a human looking at it and making sure that whatever's coming out is actually useful to your consumer.
Right. And the consumers could be anything from using major equipment, life-saving equipment, medical equipment. I mean, these are things that would have severe ramifications if they went wrong and if the instructions for use were incorrect. So yeah, I get it. I totally understand what you're saying. Well, thank you, Jess. This has been so lovely. I am even more excited to continue this conversation in terms of how freelancers can approach this as well, in the corporate space as well. So there's a lot more to discuss, but I just want to thank you again for your time. And we are going to continue this conversation. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Editor's Half Hour. This podcast is your go-to resource for editorial trends, opening the discussion for new ideas through the real-life stories of editors. For more information about Nadia Jaja Pupa and her business, visit peakpublishing.com. That's PIQUE publishing.com. And remember to subscribe and follow the Editor's Half Hour wherever you get your podcasts.